The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday morning in October, drumming against the windows of St. Mary's Chapel like angry fingers demanding to be let in. I stood at the back of the funeral home, watching my family gather around my father's casket, and I couldn't help but notice how none of them had saved me a seat in the front rows. Not that I expected them to. After 35 years of being the family disappointment, I'd learned to expect exactly nothing from the Hendersons. My name is Marcus Henderson, and this is the story of how my father's funeral became the day everything changed. But to understand what happened that day, you need to know about the 20 years that led up to it. 20 years of being treated like I was invisible, like I was some kind of stain on the family name that everyone was too polite to mention. Directly. See. The Henderson family had a reputation to maintain in our small town of Millbrook, Connecticut. My father, Robert Henderson, owned the largest construction company in 3 counties. My older brother James had followed in his footsteps, becoming a successful contractor himself. My sister Sarah married a lawyer and lived in a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. And then there was me, Marcus, the college dropout, who worked at a small accounting firm downtown, drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic, and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chun's bakery. The thing is, I hadn't always been the family failure. There was a time when my father looked at me with pride, when my siblings actually wanted to spend time with me. But that was before the incident that changed everything, before the night I made a decision that would define how my family saw me for the next 2 decades. I was 15 when it happened. James was 17, already the golden boy who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. We were at a family barbecue, one of those perfect summer evenings where everything seems possible. My father had been drinking, not unusual for him, and he was telling stories about his construction projects, his voice getting louder and more animated with each beer. That's when Mrs. Patterson from next door came over to complain about the noise. She was an elderly widow who'd lived alone since her husband died, and she had every right to ask us to keep it down. It was past 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. But my father, emboldened by alcohol and embarrassed in front of his friends, decided to make an example of her. "Listen here, you old bat," he'd said, his words slurring slightly. "This is my property, and I'll make as much noise as I damn well please. If you don't like it, call the cops. See if I care." Mrs. Patterson's face had crumpled, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. She was probably in her 70s, just a lonely old woman who wanted to get some sleep. And my father, this man I'd looked up to my entire life, was humiliating her in front of a dozen people. That's when I made the decision that would haunt me for the next 20 years. I stood up, walked over to Mrs. Patterson, and apologized on behalf of my family. I told her we'd keep the noise down, and I walked her back to her house to make sure she was okay. When I came back, the party had gone quiet. My father was staring at me with a look I'd never seen before, a mixture of rage and disappointment that cut right through me. "You embarrassed me," he said simply. "In front of my friends, in front of my business partners. You made me look like a fool. Dad, she's just an old lady who, I don't want to hear it." His voice was cold, final. "You chose her over your own family. You made your choice." From that night forward, everything changed. My father stopped asking about my grades, stopped coming to my baseball games, stopped including me in conversations about the future of the family business. James, always eager to please our father, followed suit. Sarah, who'd always been Daddy's little girl, began treating me like I was some kind of embarrassment she had to tolerate. The worst part wasn't the obvious stuff. The way they'd stop talking when I entered a room, or how family photos somehow always seemed to be taken when I was in the bathroom. It was the subtle things. The way my father would introduce James as my son, the contractor, and Sarah as my daughter, the lawyer's wife, but I was just Marcus. The way birthday presents became increasingly generic gift cards instead of thoughtful gifts. Cash instead of something that showed they'd actually thought about what I might want. By the time I graduated high school, the message was clear. I wasn't really part of the family anymore. I was tolerated, but not welcomed. Included, but not valued. College was supposed to be my escape, my chance to prove that I was worth something. I'd gotten into a decent state school, with plans to study business, maybe even come back and work for my father's company someday. But halfway through my sophomore year, Mrs. Patterson died. I found out from a neighbor when I came home for spring break. She'd passed away in her sleep, alone in that little house next door. The neighbor mentioned that she'd left everything to some distant relative who'd immediately put the house up for sale. That's when I learned something that changed everything. Mrs. Patterson hadn't just been a lonely old widow. She'd been Margaret Patterson, the widow of Thomas Patterson, a man who'd made a fortune in real estate development in the 1960s and 70s. The house I'd thought was just a modest little home was actually sitting on prime commercial property, worth over $1 million. But here's the thing that really got to me. Mrs. Patterson had remembered me. In her will, she'd left a letter addressed to the young man who showed kindness to an old woman. Along with the letter was a check for $50,000, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The letter was simple, written in shaky handwriting on cream-colored stationery. Dear Marcus, I never forgot your kindness that night when your family was having their party. In a world where so few people show compassion to strangers, you stood up for what was right. You chose kindness over family loyalty, and that takes courage. I hope this money helps you build the life you deserve. Use it wisely, and remember that sometimes the right choice is the hardest choice. With gratitude, Margaret Patterson. I stared at that check for hours, trying to process what had happened. This woman, who my family had dismissed as just a cranky old neighbor, had been wealthy enough to change my life with what was probably pocket change to her. And she'd chosen to help me because of one moment of basic human decency. That's when I made the second decision that would define my life. I didn't tell my family about the money. I dropped out of college, much to my father's disgust. I knew you'd never amount to anything, he'd said when I told him. Just like I knew you'd choose strangers over family. But while my family thought I was throwing my life away, I was actually making the smartest financial decisions of my life. I used Mrs. Patterson's $50,000 as seed money for investments. I studied the stock market like other people studied for college exams. I learned about real estate, about cryptocurrency, before most people had even heard the word, about emerging markets and technology stocks, and I was good at it. Really good. By the time I was 25, that $50,000 had grown to $500,000. By 30, it was over $1 million. By 35, when my father died, I was worth just over $3.2 million. But to my family, I was still just Marcus the failure, Marcus the dropout, who worked at a small accounting firm and lived above a bakery. They had no idea that the accounting firm was actually my own company, that I'd bought the building I lived in, that the modest Honda Civic I drove was a choice, not a necessity. I let them think what they wanted to think. Part of it was spite, I'll admit, but part of it was something else, a kind of social experiment. I wanted to see how they'd treat me if they thought I had nothing to offer them, and the answer was exactly what I'd expected. They treated me like I was nothing, which brings us back to that rainy Tuesday morning in October. Standing at the back of my father's funeral, the service was everything you'd expect from a Robert Henderson funeral. Expensive flowers, a mahogany casket that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a guest list that read like a who's who of the local business community. My father had been 68 when he died of a heart attack, still working 12-hour days and still convinced that he was building some kind of legacy. I watched as James delivered the eulogy, talking about our father's dedication to family and his commitment to building something lasting. Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the grieving daughter perfectly. My mother, who'd divorced my father 10 years earlier, but had remained close to the family, sat in the front row, looking appropriately somber. And there I was, standing in the back like a stranger who'd wandered in from the rain. After the service, everyone gathered at James's house for the reception. It was one of those sprawling suburban mansions with a 3-car garage and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. I helped myself to a sandwich and found a quiet corner where I could observe the family dynamics I'd been excluded from for so long. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. James was talking to my Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, who'd always been jealous of Dad's success. They were standing near the bar, speaking in low voices, but I was close enough to hear every word. "So what's the situation with the will?" Uncle Robert was asking. James glanced around to make sure no one was listening. He didn't notice me sitting in the corner, partially hidden by a large potted plant. "It's pretty straightforward," James said. "Dad left the business to me, the house to Sarah, and Mom gets a decent settlement from the life insurance. There's also about $200,000 in various accounts that get split between Sarah and me. What about Marcus?" James laughed, actually laughed. "What about him? Dad left him exactly what he deserved. Nothing." Uncle Robert raised an eyebrow. "Nothing at all?" "Well, not nothing. Dad left him his old watch and some books. Sentimental stuff. But no money, no property, no stake in the business. Dad said Marcus made his choice a long time ago when he chose to embarrass the family." They were talking about the Mrs. Patterson incident. After 20 years, my father was still punishing me for showing kindness to an elderly neighbor. "That seems harsh, Uncle," Robert said, though he didn't sound particularly concerned. "Dad was clear about it," James replied. "He said Marcus never showed any interest in the family business, never tried to make something of himself. Why should he benefit from Dad's hard work?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't surprise. I'd never expected to inherit anything significant, but hearing it laid out so casually, hearing James laugh about it, made something crystallize in my mind. That's when Sarah joined the conversation. "Are we talking about Marcus?" she asked, lowering her voice. "I almost feel sorry for him. Did you see him standing in the back during the service? He looked so pathetic." "He brought it on himself," James said. "Dad gave him every opportunity to be part of this family, and he chose to be a failure instead." "I know, but still, he's our brother." "Barely," James replied. "When's the last time any of us actually had a real conversation with him? He's like a stranger who happens to share our DNA." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, and honestly, it's probably better this way. Can you imagine if Marcus had inherited part of the business? He'd probably run it into the ground within a year." They all laughed at that, and I felt 20 years of accumulated hurt and anger coalesce into something hard and sharp in my chest. I stood up from my corner and walked over to where they were standing. The conversation stopped immediately when they saw me approaching. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone people use when they've been caught talking about someone. We were talking about Dad." "I heard," I said simply. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Uncle Robert cleared his throat and mumbled something about needing to find the bathroom. James straightened his shoulders, preparing for confrontation. "Look, Marcus," he began. "I know this is a difficult time for all of us. Actually," I interrupted, "I wanted to talk to you about something. Both of you." Sarah and James exchanged glances. "What about?" Sarah asked. "About the money you're going to need?" James frowned. "What money?" "Well, you're inheriting Dad's business, right? But businesses need capital to operate. And Sarah, you're getting the house, but houses need maintenance, property taxes, insurance. What's your point?" James asked, his voice taking on an edge. "My point is that you're both going to need financial support to maintain the lifestyle Dad provided for you, and I'm the only one in the family who can provide it." They stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "what are you talking about? You work at a small accounting firm. You live above a bakery. That's what you think," I said. "But what if I told you that I could write you each a check right now for more money than Dad left you in his will?" James laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Marcus. This isn't the time for jokes." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I turned the screen toward them, showing my account balance. $3,247,892. The laughter died in James's throat. "That's not possible," Sarah whispered. "It's very possible," I said. "In fact, it's been possible for quite some time. You see, while you two were busy building your lives with Dad's money and connections, I was building something of my own." I could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to process what they were seeing. "How?" James asked. "Does it matter?" I replied. "The point is, I have it. And up until about 10 minutes ago, I was planning to use some of it to help my family. To help you, James, expand the business. To help Sarah renovate that big house she's inheriting. To maybe even help Mom with her retirement. Up until 10 minutes ago." Sarah repeated, "That's right. Up until I heard you laughing about how pathetic I am. Up until I heard you talking about how I deserved nothing because I'm a failure who chose strangers over family." The color was draining from both their faces. "Marcus, we didn't mean," Sarah started. "Yes, you did," I said calmly. "You meant every word. And you know what? You're right about one thing. I did choose strangers over family. I chose kindness to a lonely old woman over loyalty to a father who was bullying her. And that choice changed my life in ways you can't imagine." I put my phone back in my pocket and looked at both of them. Mrs. Patterson, the old woman Dad humiliated that night 20 years ago. She left me $50,000 when she died. She left it to me because I showed her kindness when my own family showed her cruelty. And I turned that 50,000 into what you just saw on my phone. James was staring at me like I was a stranger. "You've had this money all along. I've had this money for years. And I've watched you both struggle with mortgages and business loans and credit card debt, and I never said a word. Do you know why?" They didn't answer. "Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing to offer you. I wanted to see if blood really was thicker than water, if family really meant something beyond financial convenience." Sarah's eyes were filling with tears. "Marcus, please, we're family. We can work this out." "Are we family?" I asked. "Because 5 minutes ago, you were laughing about how pathetic I am. 5 minutes ago, you were agreeing that I deserved nothing because I'm a failure." "We were wrong," James said quickly. We were upset about Dad. We weren't thinking clearly." "No," I said. "You were thinking very clearly. You were thinking exactly what you've been thinking for 20 years. The only difference is that now, you know I heard you." I looked around the room at all the people who'd come to pay their respects to my father. Business partners, family friends, distant relatives, people who'd known me my entire life, but had never really seen me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and steady. "James, you're going to inherit Dad's business, just like he planned. But you're going to inherit it with all its debts and obligations. The business loan that's coming due next month. The equipment that needs replacing. The contracts that are barely profitable." James's face went white. "How do you know about?" "I know about everything, James. I've been doing the books for half the contractors in this town for the past 10 years. I know exactly what shape Dad's business is in. And without a significant cash infusion, you're going to be bankrupt within 6 months." I turned to Sarah. "And Sarah, you're getting that beautiful house. But you're also getting the mortgage that still has 12 years left on it, and the property taxes that go up every year, and the maintenance costs for a house that size." "Marcus, please," she whispered. "I could have helped you," I continued. "I could have paid off James's business loans, paid off Sarah's mortgage, set up trust funds for your kids. I could have made all your financial problems disappear with a phone call. You still can, James said desperately. I shook my head. No, I can't. Because you've shown me exactly what you think of me when you believe I have nothing to offer you. You've shown me that I'm not your brother. I'm just someone who shares your DNA. I started walking toward the door, then stopped and turned back. There's one more thing you should know, I said. Dad's will. The one that leaves me nothing but a watch and some books. I had my lawyer look into it. They were both staring at me, waiting. Turns out, Dad wrote that will 15 years ago, right after I dropped out of college. He never updated it, never changed it. For 15 years, he was so committed to punishing me for one moment of compassion that he never even considered the possibility that I might have changed, might have grown, might have become someone worth knowing. I pulled out my car keys. That tells me everything I need to know about what family meant to him and what it means to you. Sarah was crying openly now. Marcus, wait, please, we can fix this. No, I said, we can't. Because this isn't about money. This is about 20 years of being treated like I don't exist. 20 years of being the family embarrassment. 20 years of watching you all live your lives like I'm not even part of them. I walked to the door, then paused one more time. You know what the funny thing is? If you'd just treated me like a brother, not even a beloved brother, just a brother, I would have helped you without you even asking. I would have made sure you were all taken care of, because that's what family does. James took a step toward me. It's not too late. We can start over. Yes, it is, I said. Because now I know that the only reason you want to start over is because you found out I have money. If my bank account showed $50 instead of $3 million, you'd go right back to treating me like I'm invisible. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Marcus, Sarah called after me. Please, don't do this. But I was already walking to my car, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt free. The next few weeks were interesting, to say the least. Word spread quickly through our small town that Marcus Henderson, the family failure, the college dropout, the guy who lived above a bakery, was actually worth millions. The story got embellished with each telling, as stories do, until some people were claiming I was worth 10 million, 20 million, even more. My phone started ringing constantly. James called every day for the first week, alternating between apologies and anger. Sarah sent long text messages about family and forgiveness and second chances. My mother, who'd been politely distant for years, suddenly wanted to have lunch and catch up. But the most interesting calls came from people I barely knew. Distant cousins who'd never spoken to me before. High school classmates who'd ignored me for 20 years. Business associates of my father, who suddenly remembered that they'd always liked me. Everyone wanted to be my friend now. Everyone wanted to reconnect, to rebuild our relationship, to make amends for past misunderstandings. And every single one of them had a story about how they'd always believed in me. Always known I was special. Always thought the family was too hard on me. It was fascinating. In a deeply depressing way, I changed my phone number and moved out of the apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. I bought a house in the next town over. Nothing flashy, just a comfortable place where I could have some privacy. I kept working at my accounting firm because I actually enjoyed the work, but I stopped taking on new clients from Millbrook. 3 months after the funeral, James's construction company went bankrupt. He'd tried to get a loan to cover the business debts, but without collateral or a cosigner, no bank would touch him. The equipment was repossessed, the office was closed, and James had to take a job working for one of his former competitors. Sarah managed to keep the house for a while by taking out a second mortgage, but the payments were crushing her family's budget. Her husband's law practice was doing well, but not well enough to cover the expenses of maintaining a house that size. 6 months after the funeral, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was my mother. Marcus, she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. Please, I need to talk to you. What about Mom? About your brother and sister? About the family? About what we've done to you? I didn't say anything. They're struggling, Marcus. James lost his business. Sarah might lose the house. And I know, ... I know it's our fault. I know we treated you terribly. And I know you don't owe us anything. But they're your family. Are they? I asked. Of course they are. Blood is blood. Marcus, family is family. Is it? Because for 20 years, family meant being excluded from conversations, being left out of photos, being treated like an embarrassment. For 20 years, family meant being judged for one moment of compassion when I was 15 years old. We were wrong, she said. We were all wrong. Your father was wrong. I was wrong for not standing up to him. James and Sarah were wrong for following his lead. And now that you know I have money, suddenly you want to make things right. It's not about the money, Marcus, isn't it? Where were these phone calls when you thought I was just a failure living above a bakery? Where was this concern for family when you thought I had nothing to offer? She was quiet for a long moment. You're right, she finally said. You're absolutely right. We only care now because we know you're successful, and that makes us terrible people. I was surprised by her honesty. But Marcus, she continued, terrible people can change. Terrible people can learn from their mistakes, and terrible people can love their children, even when they don't know how to show it properly. Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive us, she said. I'm not asking you to forget 20 years of hurt. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that people can change. That family can mean something different than it used to mean. After she hung up, I sat in my new house and thought about what she'd said. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as manipulation, as another attempt to get access to my money. But part of me wondered if she might be right about people being able to change. That's when I decided to conduct one more experiment. I called James first. Marcus. He sounded shocked to hear from me. Marcus, thank God. Listen, I've been wanting to call you, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. I want to ask you something, James. And I want you to be completely honest with me, okay? Anything. If I didn't have money, if I was still just the guy living above the bakery, would you be interested in having a relationship with me? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he finally said. I'd like to think I would, but honestly, I don't know. We've been strangers for so long, I'm not sure we'd have anything to talk about. At least you're being honest. Marcus, I know I screwed up. I know we all screwed up. But I've been thinking a lot since Dad's funeral, and I realized something. I don't even know you. I don't know what you like, what you care about, what makes you happy. I don't know anything about your life. That's because you never asked. You're right, I never asked. And that's on me, not on you. I was surprised by his response. I'd expected defensiveness, excuses, maybe anger, but James sounded genuinely remorseful. What are you saying, James? I'm saying that I'd like to get to know my brother, not because of your money, but because I realized that I've missed out on having a relationship with someone who might actually be worth knowing. Might be. He laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded genuine. Okay, probably is. Anyone who can turn $50,000 into $3 million is probably pretty interesting. I found myself smiling despite everything. James, your business failed. Yeah, it did. Turns out Dad wasn't as good with money as everyone thought. The company was barely breaking even for the last 5 years. Without a major cash infusion, bankruptcy was inevitable. What are you going to do? I'm working for Morrison Construction now. It's weird, working for someone else after thinking I was going to inherit Dad's empire. But honestly, it's kind of a relief. I don't have to worry about payroll, or insurance, or equipment maintenance. I just show up, do the work, and go home to my family. Are you happy? You know what? I think I am. For the first time in years, I'm not stressed about money all the time. I'm not trying to live up to Dad's expectations. I'm just living. We talked for another hour, and I learned more about my brother in that conversation than I had in the previous 20 years. He told me about his kids, about his marriage, about his fears and hopes and dreams. And for the first time, he asked me about my life. I called Sarah next and had a similar conversation. She was struggling with the house payments, but she'd also realized that the house was more of a burden than a blessing. She was thinking about selling it and buying something smaller, something that fit her family's actual needs rather than their image of what they should have. I keep thinking about what you said at the funeral, she told me, about how we treated you like you were invisible. And I realized that we did the same thing to ourselves. We were so busy trying to be who Dad wanted us to be that we forgot who we actually were. Over the next few months, I started having regular conversations with both James and Sarah. Slowly, carefully, we began building something that resembled a relationship. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. But there was also something new, genuine curiosity about each other, genuine effort to understand and connect. A year after the funeral, James invited me to his daughter's birthday party. It was the first family event I'd been invited to in over a decade. When I arrived, I was surprised to see that it wasn't some elaborate affair designed to impress people. It was just a backyard barbecue with a few neighbors and friends. Uncle Marcus, James's 8-year-old daughter Emma, ran up to me with a huge smile. "Daddy said you might come." I knelt down to her level. "Hi Emma, happy birthday, thank you. Daddy says you're really smart with money. Can you teach me?" I laughed. "Maybe when you're a little older." As the afternoon went on, I found myself actually enjoying spending time with my family. James was more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, no longer trying to prove himself or live up to impossible standards. Sarah was there with her kids, and she seemed genuinely happy to see me. But the real surprise came when my mother arrived. She walked up to me hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Hi, Marcus," she said quietly. "Hi, Mom, thank you for coming. It means a lot to James, to all of us." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, 20 years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between us. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, "a real one. Not because you have money, but because I failed you as a mother. I should have stood up to your father when he decided to punish you for showing kindness. I should have protected you from his anger. I should have made sure you knew you were loved, regardless of his disappointment." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Mom, let me finish," she said. "I let my husband turn our family into something ugly. I let him teach your siblings that love was conditional, that acceptance had to be earned. And I let him convince me that you were the problem when the real problem was us." She reached out and took my hand. "I can't undo 20 years of mistakes, Marcus. But I can promise you that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to be the mother you deserved all." Along that night, driving home from the party, I thought about everything that had happened since my father's funeral. My family wasn't perfect. We still had a long way to go, and there were still moments of tension and misunderstanding. But something fundamental had changed. They weren't trying to have a relationship with me because of my money. They were trying to have a relationship with me because they'd realized what they'd lost when they pushed me away. 2 years after the funeral, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I established a family trust fund with half of my assets, about $1.6 million. The money would be available to help family members with genuine emergencies or opportunities. But it came with conditions. The conditions weren't financial, they were relational. To access the fund, family members had to demonstrate that they were making an effort to maintain meaningful relationships with each other. They had to show up for important events, stay in regular contact, and treat each other with respect and kindness. It wasn't about controlling them with money. It was about using money to incentivize the kind of behavior that builds strong families. James used some of the money to start his own small construction company, but this time he built it slowly and carefully, focusing on quality work rather than rapid expansion. Sarah sold the big house and bought a smaller one that better fit her family's needs, using trust fund money to make a substantial down payment that kept her monthly expenses manageable. My mother used her portion to travel, something she'd always wanted to do but had never felt she could afford. She sent me postcards from Italy, from Ireland, from places she'd only dreamed of seeing, but the most important change wasn't financial. It was the fact that we started acting like a family. We had regular dinners together. We celebrated birthdays and holidays. We supported each other through difficult times and celebrated each other's successes. 3 years after the funeral, Emma, James's daughter, asked me to walk her to school for Bring Your Family to School Day. As we walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, she looked up at me and said, "Uncle Marcus, why didn't you come to my birthday parties when I was little?" It was an innocent question, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her family was broken for 20 years? How do you tell her that adults can be petty and cruel and stupid? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said finally. Sometimes they let pride and hurt feelings get in the way of what's really important. But you're here now, she said matter-of-factly. Double quotes. Yes, I'm here now. Good, she said, squeezing my hand. I like having you as my uncle. That night, I called Mrs. Chen, the woman who owned the bakery where I used to live. She was in her 70s now, getting ready to retire and sell the business. "Marcus," she said when she heard my voice, "how are you? I heard you moved to a fancy house in the next town." "It's not that fancy," I said, laughing. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to ask you something. Are you really planning to sell the bakery?" "Yes. I'm getting too old for the early mornings. My arthritis makes it hard to knead the dough. What if I bought it from you? Not to run it myself, but to keep it going. Maybe hire someone to manage it. Keep it as a community gathering place." "You would do that?" "I would. That bakery was my home for a lot of years. It's where I learned to be independent, where I figured out who I was when I wasn't trying to be who my family wanted me to be." 6 months later, I was the owner of Bakery. I hired Mrs. Chen's niece to manage it, but I kept the name and the recipes and the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had made it special. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, I'd go in early and help with the baking, just like I used to when I lived upstairs. There was something peaceful about the simple, repetitive work of making bread. Something that connected me to the person I'd been before money complicated everything. 5 years after my father's funeral, James called me with news that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right. Lisa's pregnant." Lisa was James's wife, and they'd been trying to have another child for several years. "That's wonderful news, James. Congratulations." "Thanks. But that's not why I'm calling. Lisa and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something." "Okay, we want to name the baby after you. If it's a boy, we want to call him Marcus." I was quiet for a long moment, overwhelmed by the gesture. "James, you don't have to." "Yes, we do," he interrupted. "We want our son to be named after a man who chose kindness over family loyalty, who built something meaningful from nothing, who forgave us when we didn't deserve forgiveness. We want him to have a name that represents the kind of person we hope he'll become." 6 months later, Marcus James Henderson was born. When I held him for the first time, looking down at this tiny person who carried my name, I thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had started with a moment of compassion for a lonely old woman. That moment had cost me my family's approval, but it had also set me on a path that ultimately led to financial independence, and eventually, to a deeper, more meaningful relationship with my family than I'd ever had before. Mrs. Patterson had been right in her letter. Sometimes the right choice is the hardest choice. But she'd left out something important. Sometimes the hardest choice leads to the most beautiful outcomes. Today, 7 years after my father's funeral, I'm sitting in my office at the accounting firm I still own and operate. On my desk is a photo from last weekend's family barbecue. The whole family gathered around little Marcus, who's now walking and getting into everything. In the photo, we're all laughing at something Emma said. James has his arm around Sarah's shoulders. My mother is holding baby Marcus, her face glowing with grandmother's pride. And I'm right there in the middle of it all. No longer the invisible family member standing in the back. My phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. Don't forget dinner at Mom's on Sunday. She's making your favorite pot roast. I smile and text back, wouldn't miss it. Because that's what family does. They show up for each other. They forgive each other's mistakes. They choose love over pride, compassion over judgment. It took us 20 years and a funeral to figure that out. But sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that take the longest to learn. The money is still there, of course. 3.2 million has grown to over 4 million now, thanks to careful investing and compound interest. But the money isn't what changed my life. The money was just a tool, a means to an end. What changed my life was learning that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in relationships, in moments of connection, in the knowledge that you matter to people and they matter to you. Mrs. Patterson taught me that with her final gift. Not the $50,000, but the lesson that came with it. Kindness is never wasted. Compassion is never foolish. And sometimes the right choice is the one that costs you everything in the short term, but gives you everything in the long term. My father never learned that lesson. He died still angry about a moment of kindness I'd shown to a neighbor 20 years earlier. He died having pushed away a son who could have been his greatest pride, if only he'd been able to see past his own stubborn need to be right. But his death wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where his children learned to be better than he was, where his grandchildren will grow up knowing that love doesn't have to be earned, that family means showing up for each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. As I finish writing this story, I can hear Emma practicing piano in the next room. She's learning a piece by Chopin, something beautiful and complex that requires patience and dedication to master. Sometimes she gets frustrated and wants to quit, but she keeps going because she knows that the most beautiful music comes from the most challenging pieces. That's what family is like. I think it's complex and challenging and sometimes frustrating, but when you stick with it, when you're patient and dedicated and willing to forgive, it creates something beautiful, something worth more than all the money in the world. The Henderson family learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it, and that's what matters. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not about money or revenge or proving people wrong. It's about the power of second chances, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that it's never too late to choose love over pride. My father's funeral was the day everything changed, but it wasn't the day my family died. It was the day my family was finally born.